Hey guys, today we're going to set up DNS bind on Ubuntu Linux. So we're going to set up a bind DNS server. We're actually going to set up a primary DNS server and a secondary DNS server. If you don't need a secondary, you could just skip that part and only just do the primary. So you can just basically stop after setting up the primary and then just skip ahead to the testing if you want. Totally up to what you need. But this is the guide we just put together. So this is our new DNS guide that we just threw together a couple days ago. So we're going to go through this, and I have a few terminals open. You'll see over here. I actually have, so this first terminal is going to be our primary DNS server. We're logged in, and I'll zoom in so you can see the text a little bit better. But you'll see this is server 1. This will be our primary DNS server, and this is server 2. This will be our secondary, and this is host 1, and this is going to be where we test this from. So we're going to test like how we would actually use this DNS on a server system. So all three of these are running Ubuntu server 20.04. Now, my desktop is also running Ubuntu 20.04, but it's a desktop system, and I'm actually probably not going to test using this DNS server from my desktop. I'm going to test using a server system as the client. All of these are virtual machines in VirtualBox that you can see running in my bar right over here. So let's get started with the first one. Well, actually, let's do both of these in parallel. So let's zoom in first so you can see the text on this, and hopefully this fits right. Hopefully all the text fits on the screen and it's zoomed in enough to really see it. Yeah, so here we go. Here's the first one, and here's the second one. And maybe I should expand this over a little bit. There we go. All right, so, and no reason not to just there we go. All right, so we're going to start off by just installing bind. Well, very first thing we're going to do, so I'm already logged into these servers, and I'm going to actually give these different names. I'm going to call this NS1 and NS2, but the actual host name I'm using is server 1 and server 2. I could just rename these, but I'm not going to. I'm just going to, these are going to be named that in DNS. That's what they will resolve to. So I'm going to, first thing we do is run a sudo apt-get update, or you could just do apt. You could do apt or apt-get. It doesn't matter. The new way is to run apt. But anyways, I'm going to paste this in, and on both of these. So the first part, the actual installation, you run on both the primary and secondary, and then we're going to move along to the primary setup. So we're going to run this just to make sure our info about the repo and what packages and dependencies are there, make sure it's all up to date. So run this on both of them. It should go pretty quick. And the next thing we're going to run, and there we go, it's done on the first one and about to be done on the second one. There we go, done on both. So next we're going to run sudo apt-get install and 3 package names: bind9, bind9 utils, and bind9 doc. You probably don't need the docs, but we're including them anyways. I mean, it doesn't hurt. I believe that probably includes the man pages and stuff, so you should probably have that stuff. But anyways, let's paste this in here on both of these and just run it. So there we go. You could have used a -y to not be prompted for this, but that's fine. Either way. Unless you're running it from script or running it like 100 times over across a large number of servers, no big deal. So this next part, I'm including this in the instructions, but I actually haven't tested how well this works. But we're going to edit etc default bind9. I've been doing this based on other documentation. Basically, my document is I've built this based on a lot of other people's documents, and a lot of what I saw wasn't exactly accurate or didn't work perfectly. So it's a combination of what I've taken from other people and from my own testing myself. So I actually set this up on these virtual machines before doing this video, and after setting everything up, I just wiped the virtual machines out and re-cloned them. So I've already gone through this whole process and figured out any issues I had or what does and doesn't work and exactly how the config files should work. Any case, this one file, I haven't verified that this actually The whole purpose of this is to use IPv4 instead of IPv6. I have not tried skipping this step, and I haven't verified that this actually works the way it should. But my servers have been working well since. But just, full disclosure, you may or may not want to look into this this one config file a little bit more if you happen to be curious. So yeah, I'm using usually I use VI, but I'm using Nano here. All right, so we're gonna save this. Yep, there we go. So yeah, I put Nano in the instructions here. Sometimes I put VI in my instructions. I put Nano just because anyone who's new and following a tutorial, there's a good chance they're not familiar with VI, and Nano is more accessible to everyone. You don't need to learn how to use it. But I generally would prefer VI. All right, so after this, we can restart bind 9. Just so that change will go into effect, even though we're not really using it yet. So next thing we're going to do is create the etc bind zones directory. So this is the directory where all our zone files are going to go. We're just going to make sure it exists ahead of time. And then we are going to, the next step we're going to run that, we're just going to make sure the firewall is open for a DNS server. So update this. All right, there we go. And then we're going to move down to only working on the primary. So I'm just going to expand this. Whoops. I am going to expand this terminal down a little bit just so you have a little bit better of a view there. And so the first thing we're going to do on our primary is edit this etc bind named.conf.options file. So I'm going to use VI for this. And there we go. I'm just going to zoom out. There we go. Yeah, I zoomed in so much that you couldn't really see all the lines. Not that it matters. I'm going to literally delete every single one of these. This gives you a start, but really I have the entire file, the entire contents of the file in this code block right here. Everything we'll need is right here. So I'm just going to go straight ahead and delete that entire thing and just paste the contents in here. And this is exactly what we're going to need in this file. So what this does, I'm going to talk a little bit about what this does. So these are the servers that we have. So server 1 and server 2 that you saw in this terminal and the server terminal down here that I was logged into, that's this IP, 192.168.3.3 and also 3.4. These two IPs are my primary and secondary, and I'm going to name them NS1 and NS2. You could set this to localhost on this server, but I just feel like that just feels more messy to me. Now, rather than just putting entries in for the name servers themselves, I wanted to put entries in for other hosts, so I spun up a couple other VMs, and that's host 1 and host 2. So we're going to be putting in entries for those also, and we're going to make sure that we can actually, from host 1, we're going to log in and use that as a client. We're going to make sure it can look up itself. It can look up. It can also look up host 2. So from host 1, we're going to be able to access our NS1 and NS2 and look up either host 2. We're going to be able to do DNS resolution forward and backward from host 1 and host 2, or of both of those hosts from host 1. Anyways, you'll see. We'll get to it. But what this section does is I took all of these and added them to the trusted ACL. And what the next section down here is the options section. And this just tells us where our var cache bind directory is going to be. Turning on recursion so you can enables recursive queries. Allow recursion trusted, so we're going to allow recursion for anything in this trusted ACL. So all of these can make recursive queries. And then we're going to listen on this IP address, which is basically the IP for the host we're on now. So this server is going to listen on this one. This is the only IP it has. But if you happen to have multiple IPs, and you maybe want to serve DNS only on your internal network, like say you had 2 IPs, and you would put the IP of your internal network and only serve on that. So you'd only listen on that IP address if you want, or you could do external if you're like a carrier or something. So you'll see we also allow transfer none. So we're disabling zone transfers by default. And we added a couple forwarders. So for anything, since these, we're going to configure these as the DNS server that will be used by host 1, we're going to need, it's only going to be able to answer queries for the entries that we've configured it to handle, which we'll get to in another config file. But any other entries, like say if you wanted to look up, apple.com or google.com or facebook.com or whatever, you would do those queries. Those queries would be forwarded to these DNS servers right here. And these DNS servers are Google's DNS servers. And these are actually what I normally would configure any client to point to. It's generally good just to avoid your carrier's DNS servers, because your ISP is going to I've seen multiple times they'll block certain sites, like for example the update site for a smart TV or something along those lines. They just block it, and the way they block it is by just not returning. You do a DNS query to their DNS servers and they just don't return the entry. Whereas if you query Google's server, it has no problem returning those entries right over to you. No problem. So that's pretty much it. You're better off with Google servers than your ISP's servers. So our forwarders are going to be these DNS servers right here. We're pointing to Google servers as our forwarders. We also turned on DNSSEC validation auto. I believe that was one of the things that was in this file already by default, and we're just going to leave that as is. It's not something we're specifically configuring. We're just not touching it. So that's kind of out of scope from what we're doing. We're just leaving it where it is because it should stay there. So write and quit, save that file. Now move on to the next file. This is Etsy bind named.conf.local. So this file is going to define our zones. It's not going to actually. I'll show you what's in here, but we're also going to have separate zone files that actually have the DNS entries. So let's take a look at this first. Paste this in here, and all right, so basically nothing in here. So wipe that out, and we're going to copy and paste these entries from this code block here. So you'll notice now you're going to change this for your own network, but you'll notice I haven't changed a single IP in anything here. I just paste the contents in because this example I have in the guide here is actually configured for my home network. So all of these IPs you see here are what I'm using on my own private network at home. So I don't have to change a single thing, but you're probably going to have a different subnet, so you're going to have to change, all your host names and what subnet you're on and stuff like that. So yeah, just if you were wondering why I'm not actually editing these files or why they're good to go as is. So anyways, two zones that I've defined. So the domain that I'm setting up, every host I define is going to be in the domain example.org. And example.org is basically this is set aside for example use. So if you were to go here, don't go here if you're trying to set this up for testing purposes. But because Chrome has a habit of caching things, and you'll have to clear your cache, and it'll log everything out and stuff like that. So if you were about to test this out, set up a DNS server, you might not want to go to this site, but if you go to this site, it'll give you a message saying, hey, this is specifically used for examples. It's used in like every textbook in the world. This is the generic example domain name. So that's and then you'll get that if you try to go to that site. So you'll get this is the domain we're using. So we're going to have one zone for this domain. Then we're going to have one zone for our subnet. So this is first zone up here is going to have forward entries. So you'll look up host names and it will resolve to IP addresses. So you do a search on a host name and it's going to tell you the IP address that corresponds to that host name. Whereas this one down here, you look up IP addresses and it will tell you what host name corresponds to that IP address. So that's going to be reverse lookups. Now you'll note this is type master That's going to be different when we do the secondary DNS server. But in the primary, it's set to master. And now you'll see file. It specifies the actual file for this zone. So all the actual DNS entries for this zone are going to be kept in a file called etc bind zones dbexample.org. So for something called example.org, this is the this is how you would normally lay this out. And then you're going to say allow transfers, and this IP address here is the IP address of our second server. We called it server 2, but we're actually going to put in an entry to call it NS2. I probably should have just made these servers names NS1 and NS2, but it doesn't matter. They can have multiple names. Any case, allow transfer. So this is telling us that the secondary DNS server is allowed to transfer from this DNS server. It can transfer this zone over, which we need to allow because that's how it's going to pull all of its data over. So we're not actually going to define these zone files the same way on our secondary server as we do on our primary server. Our secondary server is going to pull from the primary server. So you would only make DNS changes on your primary server, and the secondary would just pull them over for you. Now, same thing here. This reverse lookup zone file for the 192.168 network, and you'll notice you'll take these two octets and you put them in reverse order. That's just the convention. They just do it in reverse, I guess, because it makes it easier to look up, or maybe for one other historical reason that I'm not aware of. Anyways, this is also defined as a master, allow transfer to the same IP address, and it defines the location of the zone file. So both of these zone files are in etc bind zones, which is that directory that we created just a little bit ago. So that's that. So we're going to exit out of here, and the next step is going to be actually editing these zone files. So we specified where the zone files are, and who can pull from them inside a named named.conf.local. And now we're going to go ahead and define these zone files. So we have two zone files to define, and you notice over here I made a little note about the serial number. Anytime you update a zone file, you're going to increment the serial number. So when you make a change to a zone file, you increment the serial number, and the server knows there have been changes, and it has to reread that file and make the changes. It isn't just gonna, the changes aren't just gonna become active automatically. You have to actually increment the serial number for it to work, and that's just how a bind works. So the first zone file, which we had, we defined the location for that before, is etc bind zones dbexample.org. So this is for forward lookup. So sudo vi, and paste this in here, and now we're going to just take the entire contents of this whole file and paste this right in here, and then we're going to go through it line by line. So this first line, we've set this up. This is the name of our DNS server. This is I'm not sure why they use this syntax for this, but in any case, you could put root or admin here, whichever you prefer. And this is the DNS server name of your primary, and the example.org right here. That's our domain for this file. Anyways, serial number here. So anytime you make a change or update this file, so the next time we update this file, if we add a domain or something, we're going to update this serial number to a 5 instead of a 4. Now there's some other values here. Now you can just take these by default. You don't need to change these unless you have a reason to, but these define like retry, refresh, expire, and things like that. They're just things you can tweak and tune if the need arises. And you probably won't do that unless you're like an actual DNS carrier or you're running an ISP or something. You probably won't need to change those. So any case, or depending on how much your server is getting hit or your unique needs. But so the first set of things we're going to define in this zone file are your name servers, your NS records. So this defines the name servers for the domain, and these are NS1 and NS2. So that just tells you what the name server names are. In this column here, first column is actually blank. Now, moving along, we have name server A records. A records are forward DNS records. You'll notice this is different from how this is laid out above here. So these give us the A records for our domain servers themselves. So the server we're on now, 192.168.3.3 is the primary, which we called NS1, and NS2 is the secondary, and that is the same IP except it's a 4 instead of a 3 at the end. So you'll see this host name maps out to this IP address, and this would allow you to look it up in this order. You would look up the host name, it'll give you the IP. This doesn't allow you to do reverse lookups. We'll do reverse lookups in the next file, in the next zone that we look at. So anyways, the actual hosts we define, these are A records for actual hosts on our network, other than our name servers. So first one, host 1 and host 2. So we're going to make sure we can look up both of those hosts, and we're going to do that from host 1. So from host 1, we're going to be able to look up host 1 and host 2. And host 3 is just an alias that I put in here. So rather than being an A record, it's a C name. So C name is basically just an alias. So host 3 will point to host 2. So you can do a host lookup on this, and it will point to this, and then host 2 will then point to this IP address. Effectively, both host 2 and 3 are pointing to the same IP address, but host 3 is an alias for host 2. So that's pretty much it for our forward for our forward zone file. Now let's do sudo vi, and let's do our reverse zone file. So I'm going to copy this path, paste it in here. All right, so 192.168. Edit this, and we're going to just paste all these entries in here. It actually looks a little bit neater and cleaner. Actually, not really, but anyways, paste this right in here. Now, this stuff at the top, all exactly the same as in the previous file we just looked at. Also, these name server records, same as in the previous file we just looked at. Now, the difference with this file is we have PTR records. PTR records are for reverse lookups. Now, first thing I should point out is that I should have pointed this out in the other file. Anything that comes after a semicolon like this is a comment. So it's not really parsed by the server. It's not. So for example, here it says serial number. This is a comment. This isn't really part of the config. Same with this. These are just comments telling you what each of these parameters stands for. But basically, you're just calling. Anyways, that's pretty much what that is. So you'll see at the end, it's like this is a comment telling you that this is the PTR record section. You could put anything you want here, any text that makes sense, but you should label it as what it is, just so you know what it is. But this will not get parsed by the server. It's just a comment for our convenience. So at the end of the line here, notice it has IP addresses. These are comments. They're only there to help us know what each of these is, to help us quickly look it up and say, oh yeah, this maps out to this IP, that one maps out to that IP. That's what these are here for, just to make this file a little bit easier to understand, but they don't get parsed, so they're not really part of the configuration. So what this does, we already have the network defined. The network is the first 2 octets in, it's actually in this file name, 192.168. So this whole file, I'm going to write this in. All right, so this whole file is for this subnet. So any IP that starts with 192.168, you're going to look it up in this zone file. And so it's only for each record, you're only going to put the second. You already know anything in here is going to have those first 2 octets. So each record, you just have to define the 3rd and 4th octet. So 3.3. What this is telling you is that 192.168.3.3 maps out to NS1 and 3.4, or actually these are also in reverse. It makes it easier when you're going through these in order. When you're trying to sort these in order, it kind of makes it easier, but it's kind of confusing if you're not expecting that. So anyways, this is 3.3, 3.4, and 3.5, and 3.6. So you read them in reverse, and that's why it makes it, if you're not used to that, it's a little bit more convenient to see the actual IP that it corresponds to in a comment on the side here. But like this one maps out to NS1, this one maps out to NS2, host 1, and host 2. So this will allow you to do reverse lookups. So if you did a reverse lookup on, say, this IP address, if you did 192.168.3.5, it will return host1.example.org to you. So this allows you to do your reverse lookups on IP addresses. So that's pretty much it for that reverse zone file. So there are a few more things here. So to finish this up, we're going to check the configuration. We're going to run a command called named.-checkconf. That makes sure we don't have any syntax errors or anything wrong in our config files, and it looks like it returned without errors, so we are all set there. Now I'm going to run two more commands. I'm just going to paste them right in here, both at the same time, and OK and OK. So the first one is sudo check named check zone, and then you pass the name of the zone or the name of the domain and the path to the zone file. And same deal with this second command, check zone, and you pass the name of the, I guess you would call this the zone, but this is what you're looking up, and then you pass the actual path to the file, to the zone file, and this will tell you that this will basically just validate our zone files and make sure we don't have any typos or anything invalid. And it says OK, so it says, hey, it loaded it, serial number 4, and that it's OK. Serial number 3, it's OK. So and you could start those serial numbers at 1, I guess, if you want. It doesn't matter. You're just going to be incrementing it anytime you make updates anyways. So that validates our zone files, and finally we're going to restart bind. So anytime you update your zone files, two things you have to remember. 1, increment your serial number. 2, restart bind. You don't want to be restarting bind and wonder, oh, why won't this look up, and troubleshooting DNS and doing all these, going through all kinds of steps, and it turns out you just forgot to update your serial number. So anytime you edit those zone files, just update the serial number, just something you have to remember. Basically update the serial number and restart bind, 2 things you have to do. And running these checks on the syntax are things that are nice to do and you really should do. Anyways, so that's it for our primary DNS server. That's it. That's all you have to do. So primary DNS server, basically all you had to do was, run these steps to install it, create a directory and stuff, add this first config file, second config file, a forward zone and a reverse zone, and that's it. That's all you have to do to set up your primary. You do some checks and restart it, whatever, no big deal, but that's all we had to do for our primary DNS server. Now our secondary is even easier. So we're going to start off with named.conf.options, and this one's actually, this first file is almost the same. So I'm going to expand this. This is on server 2 or NS2, and let's see, sudo vi, and I might have to type my password again because it's been a while. All right, so I'm going to make this a little bit smaller, and I'm just going to delete everything that's here. Now for this, it's the exact same thing as your primary server for this first config file. So we literally just take this config from our primary server, copy it, and we're going to paste it right in here, and scroll back down. Now what the difference is it says listen on. It tells us the IP to listen on, and we want to update that to the current server that we're on. So for example, this says listen on, it says 192.168.3.3. That's our primary server. But since we're on our secondary server, we're going to update this to listen on the IP address of our secondary server. So there we go. Make that change, and that's it. That's the only difference in that file. So I just, I said, hey, this is the only difference. If you look at the guide, I kind of explained that there. Next thing we're going to do is configure our named.conf local, and paste that in there. And let's see, paste the contents in here. And we're going to take a look at this because this is a little bit different. So you'll notice I defined the same two zone files, but you'll notice instead of type master, it's type slave. That's the type you would set it to when it's a secondary server. That means it's going to be pulling from the master. Now the other thing we're going to define in this file, basically in the first one, we said allow transfer. In the name d.conf local for our primary, we would have said allow transfer. Now we're not saying allow transfer, but what we are saying is we're specifying the masters, and the master that we specify is 192.168.3.3. That's the IP of NS1, our primary DNS server. So we're basically specifying our primary DNS server as the master. So we're telling it, hey, we're a slave, and the master is over here, so you can pull your data from that server for this file. And it specifies, so same for each of these, and for each of these zones it specifies the file it specifies the zone that you're going to pull information for. So that's pretty much it. It's basically, so you still have to define your zones in your name d.conf.local, but what you're doing is you're telling it, hey, for each of these zones that we're going to define which ones we handle, but we're basically going to be we're going to be pulling from we're going to be pulling from the master. So anyways, that's it for that. Let's see here. Scroll back down here to where we left off. All right, so we define these zone files. Now, we don't actually have to define the zone files on the server. So interesting thing, we actually could have, remember this step at the top? We could actually skip this. We did, actually, we might want to leave that there. We could take, I'm not sure if it populates it for us or if we just don't need that. But in any case, we are not going to define zone files on our secondary DNS server. We're going to leave the zone files out, and because it's going to pull that data from the primary for us. So we really just need these first two config files and skip the zone files. So we're going to go ahead and validate our configs, and we won't have to validate the zone files because they're getting pulled over automatically. So the only thing we have to do now is restart bind. So restart bind on this server, and there we go. Now we're basically all set. We've set both of our servers up. I'm actually going to minimize both of these terminals. We don't need those anymore. I'm pretty sure I'm not going to come back to those. So now we are on host 1, and we're going to use this as a client. So let's zoom in here a little bit so you can see the text, and we're going to move on to the client setup section. Now you'll notice here I said I have a section on Ubuntu 18.4 or 20.04. Should work basically the same way because they both use NetPlan, whereas Ubuntu 16.4 did not use NetPlan. I'm not going to show you how to use Ubuntu 16 here because I don't have an example to use and it's old, and I just put that in there just to have it, but you don't need that. So what this is telling you is that you could set up under your NetPlan config, you can set up you can create another config file and just define your name servers on here, and that should probably work. What I did was go in and change my config. So the way I'll show you how I have this set up. So if you look in etc NetPlan, so now for those of you who are familiar with like older versions of Ubuntu in Debian, it used to use an etc network interfaces file. that file is associated with older network tools that are not even included by default anymore. You can still download them and use them if you want, but they're not included with the distro by default. So you're doing things like not the official way that's supported by the distro. If you want to, which I would just go with, if you're using a distro, go with the way the distro does it. If you don't like the way the distro does it, get a different distro. Of course, if you just want this distro and like doing things the old way, I guess there's nothing really inherently wrong with that. So I guess go for it if you really, really want to. But you're just kind of working against what was already set up. So in any case, so my net plan, I already have a config file in here. Now, rather than adding another net plan config file for these DNS servers, I'm actually just going to add these name server configurations to my existing config file. So the way I set up my static IP addresses on this server, this would be different if you're using DHCP, which I'm not. I'm using static IPs on my network. So let's just take a look inside this file, and we're going to edit it. So this is where I have my interfaces configured. What did I just do here? Oh yeah, so I didn't even so yeah, that's the only file in the etc netplan directory. That's my only network config file for the netplan network manager, which will basically manage all of your, it actually, netplan will manage your, see here, we have it defined, the renderer is defined as network D, which is a system D networking. It's a networking component of system D, so this works with system D. Like system D or not, this is what's included in Ubuntu these days. I actually personally have no problem with it. Anyways, so I guess moving along here. So this is a standard netplan config file to set up static IPs. We see that the version is set to 2, renderer set to network D. This is my interface name. We set DHCP to no, and we define my IP address, and the gateway and the name servers are defined as Google's name servers. This is how I normally set up my DNS. I would just use Google's DNS servers. So what we're going to do is we're going to go down here. So this is like a standard setup for me, and what we're going to do is we're going to delete this. All right, it's telling me I'm editing. Yeah, all right, before I make any changes, let's get out of here. Let's sudo this file. Yeah, so you need root privileges for this. So we're going to delete this file, or delete that line rather, sorry. And we are now going to add, I'm going to copy this and paste it in here. And let's just zoom this out a little bit. And you really do need to line this up correctly. So one thing about netplan config files, I know this is getting kind of off track from just setting up bind. We've already set up bind is basically set up. Now all we have to do is the Linux side networking and test out DNS. So anyways, in these netplan config files, apologies if you didn't care to learn about netplan today. If you just want to learn about DNS. But any case, yeah, let's just, I don't want to zoom out anymore. I want this to be more visible in the video. But all right, here we go. So we added these two addresses for name servers. And you have to have, yeah, so like I was saying, you have to have this aligned correctly or consistently at least. Otherwise, you'll get a syntax error. So, yeah, we defined addresses for our name servers, and we have, this is NS1 and NS2, our primary and secondary name server. And right now we're on, remember we're on host 1, which is 192.168.3.5. And we set our search to search this domain by default. So if you try to look up host 1, it's gonna look for host1.example.org by default for you. So you can look up host 1. You could use the whole name, fully FQDN, or fully qualified domain name. So you could say, you could look up, we'll show you how to do that. We're going to do that in a bit, but you could look up host1.example.org or just host1. And that's the reason why we have this default domain here defined to search for. So we basically specify our 2 DNS servers and the default domain, and that's it. So finish. Now that we're done with that, we can say sudo netplan try. And this is going to, so I did something wrong here. All right. And you know what? So search is supposed to line up with address. All right, so that's at the same level as that. See, if you have extra spaces, it does not like that. It's kind of a pain. All right, so warning, stopping systemd network service. It can still be activated by. Do you want to keep these settings? So, just hit enter to accept them because they are what we want. Now, let's see here. So that was successful. We are going to verify the DNS configuration has been applied by running sudo systemd-resolve status. So the systemd resolve service, we're going to basically check the status of that, and it's telling us that it's telling us our current DNS server is our primary server 192.168.3.3, and the available DNS servers we have configured are our primary and our secondary. There's 3.3 and 3.4, and our DNS domain is example.org. So there you go. That's exactly what we wanted to have configured, and that's exactly what is configured now. Now there's some other things. So when you do DNS lookups using the host tools, or using Nslookup or host, like we're going to use in the testing section coming up, they still refer to resolve.conf, etcresolve.conf. So even though our DNS system on our host is configured correctly here, if you try to look up, like for example, if you run nslookup host1, notice it's going to so it will give you the right IP address. So it is going to our DNS server eventually, but you'll notice it tells us it's using the server 127.00.53. So it's using a built-in local host. There's a local service for DNS that it's using, and we don't want it to use that. We want it to go to bind. So this local service eventually forwards it off to our bind server, but we want to go directly to our bind server. We don't want to go to this server, this intermediate server. So this is actually a problem. So we configured everything correctly, and we're still seeing this problem. Now this is a known issue, a known systemd issue, as far as I can tell. So I did a little bit of Googling and research when I was setting this up, and I ran into this issue. This was a little bit concerning to me, and it turns out it's a known issue. I have a link to it in my guide over here on the side here. And if you're looking for this guide, just check the link in the description of the video. I'm going to put a link to this guide in the description of the video. Anyways, so let's take a look at our resolve.conf, which you shouldn't have to edit yourself. You used to edit this yourself, many years ago, and I've gotten used to it, and I like editing it myself, but it's just not something you do anymore because it gets automatically generated by systemd tools. So cat etcresolve.conf, and you'll see it has a message. This file is managed by systemd resolved. That's the daemon we were just looking at. And you'll notice the name server is set to 127.00.53. Now that's not right at all. So we know something's going wrong. Now, if you look at there's a file called run systemd resolve.conf. Now, if we cat this file, you're going to notice that the name server is set to our primary and secondary, and the search is set correctly. So this file, run systemd resolve.conf, is correct, but our etcresolve.conf is wrong. Now, this is a known issue, which hopefully is getting fixed soon. Maybe if I upgraded my system now, it would be fixed. Maybe because if I did like a full upgrade, I'm not sure. But I haven't looked at any fixes to this bug or anything. But there is a workaround for this that I used. So you'll also notice if you look at this file, it's a link to run systemd resolve stub resolve conf. All right, for whatever reason, to that file. Anyways, forget that. So bottom line, what you have to do is rm-f etc resolve.conf, remove that file, and you are going to you're just going to link it to the file that was generated correctly. So that our systemd -resolved service did generate a correct file. So we're just going to link our etc resolve.conf file to the correctly generated file, and problem solved. All right, unable to resolve host. All right, yeah, that's fine. Yeah, that should be fine. We will be able to resolve that. I'm not sure why it's giving me that error, but it's fine. All right, so moving along here. So now that we've worked around that issue, actually let's just verify that we fixed it. So nslookup host 1, and there we go. We see okay, that's not fixed. All right, we're going to try to troubleshoot that, but at the very least, it's pointing to the correct DNS server. So that's kind of nice. All right. Anyways, let's move along, and we're going to do our testing, and we're also going to troubleshoot this and figure out what went wrong with it, or what I did wrong. So one thing I should point out is DNS utils install. Now, at least on the server versions that I have installed, we have the command. We have now pretty much every Ubuntu or Debian system I've ever tried has the host command. You can use host for DNS lookups, but also there's a command Nslookup, and so there's 3 commands we're going to use for testing: host, Nslookup, and dig. Now, Nslookup and dig, if you don't have them for whatever reason, you can get them by saying apt-get install DNS utils. So you would run it like this. I'm not going to actually run it, and you'd want to use sudo. So like sudo apt-get install DNS utils, and that will install those 2 commands. We already have them on this server version. I forget. I think you might not get them on the desktop version of Ubuntu. So, anyways, let's see here. So moving along, we're going to try host 1. All right, and host 2, not found. And I don't know why I'm doing that. So, you know what? I shouldn't have said that. It looks like I am going back to these DNS servers. You know what? This was working just a little bit ago, though. So I'm betting I did something wrong with resolve.conf. But it looks correct. All right, so I cut out for a bit, but I needed to poke around with things for a little while. So I didn't want to record all of that back and forth and a lot of just poking around. A lot of it was just me looking at things that didn't need to be changed. But as it turns out, I found what the problem was, and as it turns out, the serial number needed to be incremented in the zone file. So let me show you right here inside. So for example, in dbexample.org on the server, I actually needed to, even though this is my first time even pasting any of this text into this file, apparently I needed to increment it from a 4 to a 5. So it still wanted me to increment it. I guess it needs to get an initial value and then be incremented before it will even think about, before the DNS server will even think about pulling in any of these entries that we have here. So even the very first time you create the file, you're going to save it, and then you still need to increment it. For whatever reason, I would not expect that behavior. I was actually kind of surprised by that, but I incremented the number and bounced the service just to see if it would work, and it did work. All right, so yeah. Anyways, yeah, that's pretty much it. Actually, one thing that kind of tips me off to that is that like I was actually I was running these queries, and it would tell me I'm actually accessing the right server, and that but it just can't find the domain. So it looks like it's the client is able to reach the correct DNS server. It's pointing to the right place, but it's just not getting the data that it should. So the server is not returning the right data. So I tried it out, incremented the serial number, and it now works. So if in doubt, that's something to check, even when you think you probably shouldn't have to. So it's not just anytime you make a config change. It's on your initial config change also. So anyways, so here we have, I did a successful Nslookup of, oh yeah, and here I'm actually specifying the host to look. But let's see here. You can remove this and just say host 1, and you'll notice that it's actually still working. So it says the server it's looking up from is 3.3. That's our primary DNS server, and it's also it's looking up. This is the host name, and this is the IP that it resolves to. So you can notice, you can say nslookup host 1, and it will basically expand it out to the FQDN and look up the IP for you. So with that fixed, we can move along to our testing section. And for testing, we're going to do forward lookups using the host command, the nslookup command, and the dig command. And then we're going to do a reverse lookup with each of those also. So for the host command, we're basically going to look up host 1 and host 2. So let's just paste those in there. We've already done. So yeah, host 1, host 2, and that just returns the values in an easily parsable format by default. So this is easy to parse with a script and stuff, but it doesn't give us the extra details like what server it's looking up from. Now, I haven't looked at it, but there may be parameters that you can pass to so that it would give you that output, and you can probably get nslookup to give you output like this. But either case, by default, this is how this works. This is a simple tool. So you can also look up host 1 and host 2 using the FQDN, and that also works exactly the same. So that's the host command doing forward lookups, works completely fine. Let's try nslookup. So we've already used this command a little bit before when we were just testing things, and I guess we're still just testing things. So let's run it on host 1 and host 2. In both cases, we can see it's accessing our DNS server, and it is giving us the correct IP address for each of these hosts. And it will do the same thing if you look them up by FQDN instead of just the short host name. So let's paste those in again. Full FQDN gives us the same data that we get returned, and same thing here. So everything as we would expect it. We're going to run dig. Let's just run it on host 1 first. So paste dig in there. Let's just clear the screen and run dig. So this gives us a lot more info about like the header and the query, the answer, authority, things like that. So it's a lot more info to look through. It's a lot messier, but you could just like grep this stuff out if you wanted to, and it does give us some nice parsable output. You'll see this is the host we tried to look up, and this is the IP address it resolves to. By default, I actually did not have luck using just this. I did not get the value I was looking for returned when I just used the host name, but it works with FQDN. Now, a lot of people swear by dig and love it, and I'm sure there's a parameter in there somewhere that will allow you to use the short host name, something that I'm just not as familiar with. I personally don't use the dig tool all that much. I mostly use host or Nslookup, which are both fine. A lot of people who do DNS for ISPs and stuff, people who do DNS day in and day out, they love the dig command. People love it. I don't. I don't mind it. I don't have any special feelings towards it, but a lot of people like it. So let's just test host 2. We can look up host 2 by FQDN also, and there's our answer. There's our host name and IP address with all this extra data that you might find useful if you're debugging a DNS server, if you're looking at how things work inside and how the protocol works and stuff. All this extra info can become useful. So anyways, let's do the reverse lookups. So instead of looking up host names, let's look up IP addresses. So we're going to use the host command, look up 192.168.3.5, and you'll notice that points to host 1. And same deal if you do 6, that points to host 2. Alright, so nothing too exciting or unexpected there. Same thing with Nslookup. Just to show you, Nslookup command for 3.5 and for 3.6. That's host 1 and 2. Works perfectly well as we would expect. The dig command. Let's run the dig command for a reverse lookup. For this, you actually have to use a parameter -x and specify the IP address, and there we go. There's a reverse lookup. It tells us the IP address we're looking up and the host name that we wanted to have returned. And notice the format it returns it in. It returns it in this reverse format, just like how the actual record looks inside the inside your zone file. So yeah, just something to point out, I guess. And same thing with 6. It still returns, it returns host 2 as you would expect. So everything as you would expect. So that's how you can test that with those 3 commands. Now I have a little note down here at the bottom. Anytime you update the fig files, run this command to validate. And anytime you update your zone files, increment the serial number and run the named check zone command, like these 2 commands right here. And after making these changes, of course, reload bind, so restart your bind server. So yeah, lesson learned: always update your serial number in your zone files, and even when you're initially creating the zone files. So I imagine basically you would need to start up your bind server with the zone file, then increment it and restart it yet again. But if you do run into issues where you're not seeing the initial data you put in there, just increment it again and restart it again, and that may help you. That may resolve the problem like it resolved my problem. So that's pretty much it for today. Hopefully you found this useful. Hopefully this helps somebody set up a DNS server. If you have any questions, comments, criticism, anything you want to say, do leave a comment down below. I try to read everybody's comments eventually, and I try to reply when I can, sometimes quickly, sometimes less quickly. But yeah, definitely leave a comment down below. We want to know what you think. And we do answer questions when we can. And also, you're probably going to want to give us a thumbs up, and you're definitely going to want to hit the subscribe button to get more great content like this. We cover a lot of things. We cover servers and services, Linux, servers you could run Linux on, services you run on Linux, automation, scripting, coding, Python, Java, Golang, all different things like that. We cover all of this stuff. We cover like middleware, messaging services. We get out into a lot of other diverse tech-related things like 3D printers, single board computers, electronics, networking, hardware. desktop hardware, server hardware, all of that stuff. So we cover just a lot of great technology related stuff. So there's a lot of great content you can look forward to if you hit that subscribe button. You're probably going to want to hit the little bell icon just so you get updates when we put out a new video. So just so it'll give you an alert within YouTube saying, hey, new video came out, you might want to take a look. Yes, that's pretty much it. Hopefully you enjoyed the video, and thanks for watching. We will see you next time.